we have an important guest here this morning, and he has a tight schedule. So I would like you all to join me in welcoming Congressman Lee Zeldin. Congressman, welcome. And I want to thank you for all of us, for all the things you've been doing for the North Fork.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you wouldn't mind indulging me, can I ask you to stand? We'll start off the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Legislator Krupski, you want to kick us off?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. As we enjoy each other's company and life in the greatest congressional district in America, we keep in our thoughts and our prayers those who are thousands of miles away from the North Fork, keeping us safe and free, serving. And thank you to all of the veterans who are here in the crowd as well. And thank you to Maria for the invitation. I'm really honored to be with all of you. I was asked to cover two topics in particular to give you an update on and then be able to answer a couple of your questions. And I'm just really excited to be here. The first one is the very exciting topic of flood insurance. So flood insurance is a program that under the NFIP has been struggling with solvency issues for a very long time. The maps are outdated and flawed. The solvency issues are a problem. The inability to get more available products. If you don't like your coverage, there isn't a lot of other options available. And then when you have to go through the unfortunate event of a mass incident like what we suffered with Superstorm Sandy, then you have a whole lot of money getting paid out by the insurance companies, and not all insurance companies are equal. Some might be doing a really good job of nearly 100% customer satisfaction rates and people getting paid out. Others, 6 years later, still not finalized with their claims. There are still many people from Superstorm Sandy nearly 6 years ago who have not had their claims resolved. Not all insurance companies are equal. In my office, Bill Doyle handles everything from a constituent standpoint. We actually carried over cases from when I was in the state senate. Almost all of those cases are resolved, not all. But New York Rising is run through New York State. Even though that's another level of government, we would still love to be able to help you however we can. So if you want to reach out to us, we reach out to the New York Rising folks and try to assist on a case-by-case basis. Flood insurance. Around the end of the fiscal year 2017, if you remember, there was a meeting at the White House with all the legislative leaders and the president where there was a deal struck where they extended funding for the government for 90 days. They temporarily increased the debt limit. There was a disaster aid package that was included. Plus, they extended the flood insurance program for 90 days. Now you might be thinking 90-day extension, you don't want it to expire, that seems like good policy. What was really unfortunate about that deal that was cut at that time as it related to flood was that there was a lot of confidence that we were actually going to be able to do something big that month. I serve on the House Financial Services Committee, so the flood insurance program is part of our committee. I'm on the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee. I really believed that we were on the verge of getting a great flood reauthorization reform package done by the end of that month. We passed it actually out of the House. The consequence of extending for 90 days ended up becoming even more problematic. I mean, it's good that you never want the flood insurance program to expire, which I'll get to, the July 31st deadline next. You never want the program to expire. What happened though during those 90 days is that 2/3 of the debt of NFIP was bailed out. So the urgency for doing big reform, immediately when you go from a $24 billion number to an $8 billion number, you just saw the wind come out of the sails, and we've been dealing with these short-term extensions. So as of right now, the flood insurance program is scheduled to expire on July 31st. The House passed an extension for the next several months. The Senate is expected to pass that extension as well. So there is no belief that NFIP is actually going to be expiring, because the understanding is that the Senate is going to be passing what the House passed before the July 31st deadline. That's just a straight extension. One of the things that was included when the House had passed the larger reform bill, I have this bill called the NFIP Policy Protection Act. As of right now, the current system does not reward mitigation that you do on your home with a reduction of your policy premium. If you are going to invest in mitigation activities for your home, you should see that return on your policy. Your premiums should go down. That was part of what was passed in the House, and hopefully when the House does something more, when Congress does something more than just a straight extension, that one of the bills that will be included is the NFIP Policy Protection Act. That's a little bit about flood. The other topic I was asked to discuss is helicopters. Helicopters, what was really unfortunate a couple years back, if you remember, I was notified, I would say it was on a Saturday morning. It might have even been the same day as this meeting, right? Yeah. So Teresa reached out that she received a notice. Now, as a member of Congress, this should not happen. This line of communication I'm about to tell you should not go down this way. Teresa contacted me on a Saturday to notify me that she found out that the Federal Register Monday morning was going to be posting an extension of the North Shore helicopter route. Now, that alone is filled up with all sorts of issues. We were very upset just by the fact that I should not be learning about it that way. You all shouldn't be learning about that way, because it is under the Administrative Procedures Act, a federal law that requires public input, public comment. It requires communication with your local elected officials. You all have the opportunity through a public hearing, or if you can't attend a public hearing, or even if you do, you want to submit a written comment, that you're able to do that. None of that happened. So they ended up extending the North Shore helicopter route as an emergency, completely circumventing the Administrative Procedures Act. I had a meeting at the time. Supervisor Russell was part of it. The Riverhead supervisor at the time, Sean Walter, he was there. There was a whole bunch of people from the FAA, and it was revealed that they did give a heads up to one of the federal elected officials representing our area. It wasn't me. And I was really upset that they had circumvented this Administrative Procedures Act. So that, from a policy standpoint, has been the biggest problem that I've had with it, as far as what is available in my toolkit. What leverage do I have as a member of the House to correct what they did wrong 2 years ago? Right now, Congress has to pass an FAA Reauthorization Act. The House has passed the FAA Reauthorization Act, and what I did was add language to the FAA. So the House passed FAA Reauthorization bill that is now in the Senate. Includes language specifically with regards to the North Shore helicopter route. If the Senate passed the House version, the language that was in the House passed version requires the FAA to revisit the North Shore helicopter route, requires them to reopen the public comment period. It requires the FAA to have public hearings, and it also requires the FAA to pursue an all-water South Shore route. It's very different between, and I'm preaching to the choir, it's very different between North Fork and South Fork when you study the economic benefits when weighing it against the disruption of quality of life. Something else that's really interesting is that you have appointed individuals, or some have stepped up, to be the person to call the FAA to record all of the complaints. Something interesting to point out about that is the FAA kind of views that as a constituent who has, too much, this is their perception, has too much time on their hands, and they're complaining on their own behalf. So, if you have, instead of having 3,000 people make 3,000 calls, it seems to make sense to have one person relay all the information of what those 3,000 calls would say. That's efficient. But just something for your radar is, I get the impression in talking to the FAA that they believe that it's a person who has too much, or two people have too much time on their hands. Now, obviously, we push back and we explain, no, these are people who are calling on behalf of a whole lot of other people. Would you rather have all of these people contacting you, or would you rather have a few people contacting you? But I'm just pointing that out, that's an observation that I've made in talking to the FAA. So we need the Senate to pass the House passed version. I believe that the right answer is an all-water route to go to the South Fork, and you have some pilots who respect self-policed activities and rules. There are a whole lot of other pilots who don't. So where you might have a regional helicopter council setting up an altitude restriction, self-policing, setting up an altitude restriction, or deciding at what point is going to be your transition point to head towards your landing location. Even if you have a whole lot of pilots who are signing up and abiding by whatever way the industry chooses to self-police themselves, the problem is that you have rogue actors who are not respecting that, and that's why the FAA needs to get more involved. But I wanted to mention it as the helicopter issue. Your main leverage as it relates to federal legislation right now is the FAA Reauthorization Act. So in your dialogue with our two senators, other members of the House, even if you happen to, for some reason, your cousin is married to the senator from wherever, any help in spreading the word and educating them elsewhere. It's not just about your House member, your two senators. Really, if there's anything you can add in educating members of the House and the Senate who aren't those three, that's good too. But that's your main leverage point, is the upcoming expiration of the FAA reauthorization bill, the need to reauthorize it, and including the House-passed legislation requiring the FAA to revisit the North Shore helicopter route. So those are the two topics I was asked to address. I want to be able to answer a couple of questions, and right before I do that, I just want to say thank you for what is a privilege to be able to represent this district. And I'll tell you, it's an interesting time to be involved in politics. I know that Thanksgiving dinner conversations with the family isn't the same for all families as what they once were. Conversations at work amongst colleagues, not at all companies are as normal as they once were. And it's an interesting time in politics. However, what I've also experienced, which I'm so greatly encouraged by, is just how many people, despite all of the noise, how a very, very, very large majority of the people who live in this country right now are actually keeping their sanity, keeping their cool, and trying to talk to each other, to work together. But I'll tell you, there is noise out there that we have to figure out how to break through. And there are issues, by the way, that we're going to debate. I mean, it's important. We live in this great country where we're supposed to be debating issues, and disagreement is acceptable. But I just want to say that I am been encouraged. It's actually a positive thought I just wanted to share. That I've also been encouraged when I travel around this district, when I talk to colleagues in Congress, when there's a vote, believe it or not, during a vote series, we're not physically dueling on the House floor. There's actually conversations about the FAA reauthorization bill, or extending the NFIP, and it's a privilege to be there. So thank you for allowing me to serve you in Congress. It's nice to be home, sleeping in my own bed for a few weeks here. We just started what they call August recess, but if you look at my schedule, you probably think I'd rather be in DC because it's a busy day. It's gonna be a busy month. There's a lot to do, and I'm looking forward to answering a couple questions before we turn it over to our next great guests. Sir.
John Ladman from Cutchogue. I own property in South on Johnson Street. My family has owned it since 1945. And the last two storms, I lost between 15 and 18 foot of tree front. I went to FEMA 3 times. They were in Southold once, twice over 10 years. They told me that even though my grandson lives in the house, that I would have to live there for them to do any help. That doesn't make sense because I pay taxes on it. And I got no help from FEMA at all.
And what year? Are you talking about from the 2012 storm or something more recent?
2 big storms we had, lost people.
Sandy or more recently?
Well, no, not recently.
A while back, yeah. So one of the things that I've experienced of looking at these storms historically is that sometimes you have a storm hit, and then Congress will pass emergency disaster aid. And the way that bill is crafted comes up with its own rules of how that money is distributed. So under Sandy, FEMA, so in New York State, we ended up, so the program was administered through New York. FEMA came in and assisted. Some of the money was direct FEMA reimbursements, but a lot of the money that came to our district was actually administered, broken into different pots of money under different rules, administered under the New York Rising Project. When it's not through disaster aid, and you're utilizing another pot of money, there could be a different set of rules for that particular event that happened. What I would strongly encourage and request is that if you're willing to reach out to Bill Doyle in my Patchogue office, this is what we do. He has done this specifically time and time again where an individual will reach out with their specific issue. And I'll tell you that there have been a number of times where a person went to the government for advice and got bad advice from New York Rising. And I'll tell you that the FEMA piece isn't as much of the issue as far as Sandy goes. There have been a lot of New York Rising issues, especially because there's a lot of turnover in staff and case files getting assigned to different people, and then case files getting lost. And you're like, you told me 9 months ago that all my paperwork was in, and now you're going to tell me, now a new person 9 months later is telling me you don't have any of my paperwork at all, or that I was missing a document. Why didn't you let me know? Why did you wait 9 months until I reached out to you to tell me that I was missing a document? You should have told me that over half a year ago. So I'd encourage you to reach out, and depending on the timing of your event and the specific claim that you have, we can research the rules, and if you were given any type of bad advice, we'll help you break through the bureaucracy to get your money.
My name is Jim O'Malley. I live here in Peconic, and my question is relative to not the flood nor the air noise, but specifically to Goldsmith Inlet. And one of the things that we've had difficulty in getting is a positive response from the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, you and I both have been in service, and when we received a request from a congressman, in my position in the Army, was that I had to respond within 24 hours to a congressional inquiry. I don't know if you've had that experience. But what we would like to do is to be able to get your assistance in getting the Army Corps of Engineers to respond to us, right, to our committee, within 48 hours of our requesting the Army Corps of Engineers to respond to our request. What we've had is a delay. Sometimes there's been no response whatsoever. And we have a committee that we're going to present a request to the Army Corps of Engineers, and we'd like your assistance to facilitate a more responsive action on their part. Can we get your commitment to that assurance?
Yeah, so well, the answer is yes. There's been a lot of activity with the Army Corps. I met with Colonel Asbury, who runs the region, specifically met with him as it relates to Goldsmith. He has sent a team out to Goldsmith, and where they are at as of this particular moment is trying to identify a federal interest under pre-existing authorities. There isn't precedent where they currently have identified a federal interest where they are allowed to come in and do it. They're trying to find one creatively. There isn't one through Superstorm Sandy. They're trying to see if there's any way to justify one, because we told them that it's a high priority for the local community. This is a request. The Army Corps is very well aware of this request as it relates to Goldsmith. I will tell you, as it relates to Goldsmith and other projects around New York One, when we engage the Army Corps and say that this is a very, very important priority, they are very receptive to us, very receptive. The biggest challenge when they say yes to me, the next step is finding money. They're also really big into finding a pot of money where it's authorized to use that pot of money for this purpose. And I'll tell you, Colonel Asbury, who runs the region, time and again has gone out and fought for, within the Army Corps work plan, getting funding for projects in this district. He'll put a request in. Sometimes Army Corps will push back because what you won't find, which is a good thing, what you won't find in analyzing Army Corps projects all across the country is all sorts of unauthorized work where some regional colonel, is going ahead, going rogue without, permission from the Army Corps headquarters and just doing a project. Colonel Asbury, I get the impression, absolutely wants to help, fully wants to help, but has to identify a federal interest under pre-existing authorities. If not, then you would have to pass new legislation that basically just creates a federal interest. One of the challenges since 2009 is that Congress got rid of earmarks. So what used to happen is that you could just add a line to a funding bill. I could add a line to a funding bill that says X amount of dollars for Goldsmith, and then that's it. In order to fund the government at the end of September, you're going to include my earmark. That stopped 9 years ago. So you can't do that. If you can't find a federal interest under pre-existing authorities, you're going to then have to pass new legislation, but you're going to have to do it in a way that defines, you would have to capture Goldsmith, but define it in a way that's not an earmark for Goldsmith. It would have to be a national bill that says that under this definition, and you define it in a way that covers Goldsmith, under this definition, that ends up being a federal interest that you can use federal money for. And then you have to craft it as narrowly as possible so that the cost for getting this done for Goldsmith, the Congressional Budget Office doesn't say, that's going to cost, $3.6 billion. Obviously, Goldsmith doesn't cost that. But if you don't craft if necessary, if required, if the Army Corps says we are unable to find a federal interest where you then have to pursue new legislation, we're then going to have to figure out how to word it where it passes through the parliamentary review, so it's not ruled an earmark, and two, you don't draft it in a way that does get through, but that costs too much extra money.
Okay. I clearly understand what you said, but originally the project was to have a channel that had 2 jetties. One jetty was built, the other one was terminated for whatever reason, but there was funding originally established back in the 1960s. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers has looked at it, has indicated that there should have been the second jetty. All right. We are now in a position to request the second jetty. The state, the county has more or less concurred. We've had studies, we've had surveys, and we want to now move ahead. And we'd just like to know that with our recommendation, going back to the Army Corps of Engineers, right, that they concur and they agree. Now, the funding is one thing, right, but the engineering and the determination that it should be done and that they will do it when the funding's available, okay, is what we want. And that's what we'd like you to do.
Yeah, got it. So yes, I would love to continue to work with you and your group. I talk to Colonel Asbury all the time. I talk to Colonel Asbury about Goldsmith specifically. So whatever it is that you want me to relay at all in support of what you're asking for, that's my job, and I'm happy to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.